Do you know somebody, or might you be somebody, who goes through life lugging around a heavy weight? You travel with, you're always carrying a heavy weight, and it's just never far from you. The heavy weight could be a secret, a deep secret in the family, skeleton in the closet. You carry it with you. Or it could be a regret, could be a mistake, it could be a rift, it could be, I think the Yiddish term for this is a verriebel. It starts small, then becomes big, and now it's broken. And the thing about the heavy weight is you don't know what to do to get rid of the heavy weight. You don't know how to resolve the problem that gave birth to the heavy weight. And before you know it, time goes by. Before you know it, days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years, turn into decades. And now it feels like you are just stuck, S-T-U-C-K, carrying this heavy weight. Helpless and hopeless, stuck. Too much water under the bridge, stuck. Too much time has passed, stuck. Well, if you know of somebody who is like that, or if you might be somebody like that, I have something that I would invite you to consider and to engage. It's this remarkable podcast called Heavy Weight. And it's by a guy named Jonathan Goldstein. And here's the premise of this podcast. Every episode features people who are carrying around a heavy weight, a secret, some source of shame, some regret, some mistake, some brokenness, and it goes for years and then it goes for decades, and they think, I can never get rid of this heavy weight. And then Jonathan Goldstein, who is the originator of the podcast and also a participant in the podcast, shows up with a microphone in hand, and he begins this process of conversation, and each episode ends with some kind of reconciliation, a renewal. Both parties decide to put down the heavy weight and to start fresh. And here's the thing, there's a remarkable paradox at the heart of this. If you've ever carried around shame, secret, rift, brokenness for years, it really does feel like this is impossible. You're never going to be able to put it down. But this is the paradox. The solution to this is simple, and it's clear, and it's hidden in plain sight, and it's super effective, but we never think about it. And it was simple and clear and effective for the participants in these podcasts, and it would be simple and clear and effective for us. So I'll give you an example of just two particularly evocative podcasts. First one is called Buzz. Buzz is the name of the father of Jonathan Goldstein. At the time of the episode, he is 80 years old, and there's only one member of his nuclear family left. That is his brother Sheldon, who is 85 years old. Buzz lives in Montreal. Sheldon lives in Florida. And they have not talked for years. They've been deeply estranged for years. They have not been part of one another's family life for years. In fact, when Sheldon's wife dies, he doesn't bother to tell his brother Buzz. Buzz has no idea that his brother has become widowed, that his sister-in-law is gone for years. Enter Jonathan Goldstein. Jonathan Goldstein says to his dad, "Hey, Dad, you're 80 years old. You're not getting any younger. And you only have one brother, Sheldon. He's 85. He's not getting any younger. If I came with you to Florida, might you be open to talking to your brother?" And his dad says, Buzz says, "Yeah, I'd love that." And then Jonathan reaches out to Sheldon and says, "Hey, it's your nephew, Jonathan, and my dad would be good with seeing you. Would you be open to seeing him? I'll come with, try to just have a new approach." And Sheldon says, I would love that. And so Jonathan goes with his dad, Buzz, to Sheldon in Florida. Sheldon lives alone with his cat, and Sheldon and the cat, Jonathan and Buzz, sit down together. That's the first podcast. Here's the second one. This story is unbelievable. It's called The Marshes. The Marshes are a family in Minnesota. So the deal is that Jean, Jean, and Pete met when they were in high school, and they had a fling, and Jean got pregnant. And she carried the baby to term, and when the baby was born, she held her child, this little girl. They named her Alicia. Jean and Pete just loved Alicia, but they were teenagers. They didn't think they could really raise her, and so they put her up for adoption in Minnesota. And it began as a fling, as just a casual moment that gave birth to this daughter, but the pain that they both felt at losing their daughter, having to give her up, brought Jean and Pete together, and what began as a fling turned into deep love. 3 years after the adoption, they got married. Roll the film forward for 48 years. They live together in Minnesota, and they have 3 more children, Kevin, Stephen, and Lisa. And they never tell their 3 children about the existence of their older sister. It's the big secret. And the father says, Pete says, every day for 48 years, I think about Alicia, I think about our daughter that we gave up for adoption. The mother says substantially the same thing. They never talk about it. This is the weight they carry around. And then one day, the secret comes out, and the 3 younger siblings find out that they have an older sibling they've never met, and the family has a whole conversation around, should we reach out to this daughter, to this sister that we never even knew about? And enter Jonathan Goldstein. Now, here's the premise of this podcast. The premise of the podcast is that something could be broken for years and years, but the fact that it has been broken does not mean that it needs to be broken. And in fact, there is a way to solve for this. The premise is that if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. But if you don't always do what you always did, if you change it up, you can get something completely different. And this is the simple part and the clear part. And this is so powerful. And this is so beautiful. And it just comes down to 2 magical words. Talk to. Don't talk about. When you talk about, you don't solve. When you talk to, you can make things very different. And in this way, Jonathan Goldstein becomes the living embodiment of a teaching from Pirkei Avot 1:12, chapter 1, the 12th teaching, which is, be like the disciples of Aaron. What's the deal with Aaron? Aaron is described as being Ohev Shalom V'rodef Shalom. Aaron loves peace, and he pursues peace. Ohev et habriot, he loves human beings. Mekorvan la Torah, and he brings them close to the Torah, in particular the central premise of the Torah, love your neighbor as yourself. And the rabbis ask about Aaron, how does he do this? He loves peace, he pursues peace, he loves people, tries to get people to treat each other with the dignity with which they would want to be treated. How does he do it? And this is the classic Aaron story, and this is what Jonathan Goldstein does, and this is what I think we can do. Reuven and Shimon are not talking to each other. And Aaron goes to Reuven and says, hey, Reuven, would you mind talking to Shimon? Shimon would like to talk to you. And Reuven says, okay. And Aaron goes to Shimon and says, Shimon, would you mind talking to Reuven? Reuven would like to talk to you. And Shimon says, okay. And they talk to each other. and they're able to make things better. That's what Jonathan Goldstein does. So, Jonathan Goldstein is there with his father, Buzz. They knock on the door. Buzz and Sheldon have not seen each other in 100 years. Buzz has not seen Sheldon since Sheldon's wife died. And it starts, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, they don't quite know where to begin. But they talk to each other, and eventually they start talking to the heart of the matter, which is how their estrangement began. And here's the deal. It turns out that the home of their youth, their parents' marriage, was a hot mess. Their father was very abusive. And one particularly traumatic day, their mother packs up and walks out on her husband and walks out on the two boys. And then, a coda to that story, the mother, the wife who had walked out, comes back and she takes Sheldon with her. Takes Sheldon but not Buzz. So Buzz feels doubly abandoned the first time, and then the second time when he was passed over. And he's left with the father. And as a result, Buzz becomes a very angry person, and as a result, this core wound, the brothers just can never connect. And this has ramified and played out for 76 years. He was 4 years old when his mother passed him over. It's 76 years later. Finally, they're sitting talking over the kitchen table of Sheldon in Florida, and they're talking to each other about this, and Buzz says to Sheldon, "Why did Mom not take me? Why did Mom take you?" And then Sheldon said, "Don't you know why?" And Buzz says, "No, I have no idea why." And Buzz says, and Sheldon says, "Hey, listen, Buzz, Dad was really abusive to me. I was the older child, he was very abusive to me, and Dad had a soft spot for you. And Mom had no money, and she couldn't raise both of us. And so she picked the one who she felt was more vulnerable with an abusive father. The one who was more vulnerable to an abusive father was me, and she felt that she'll keep the one who's less vulnerable to an abusive father. That would have been you. That's why she took me, not you." And Buzz had no idea, and just talking to his brother about it was therapy. And as a result, they turned to each other and said, "Hey, we're 80 and 85. Why don't we spend the rest of the years that we have being loving brothers?" And that's how the first episode ends. Now comes the Marshes. So they're thinking, do we try to reach out to our daughter Alicia? Should we try to introduce Alicia to her younger siblings? So the way adoption works in Minnesota is you can't actually talk to directly. You have to work through a social worker that the adoption agency does, and you can't email. It has to be handwritten letters. So Jean, the mother, writes this whole handwritten letter to her daughter Alicia, whom she hasn't seen in 48 years, but whom she's never stopped thinking about. She tells the story from her point of view, gets it to the social worker, and then before she knows it, the daughter writes back and tells the following story. "Hey, guess what? I lived my whole life 20 miles from you. My adoptive mother went to the same high school that you went to. I'm 20 miles from you now." And they correspond with each other, and Jean and Pete ask, "Could we meet you?" And her name is now Natalie, not Alicia. Natalie says, "I would love that." And they get together, Natalie and Jean and Pete and the other three children, Kevin, Stephen, and Lisa. And Jean is able to look at her daughter, whom 48 years earlier she had given up for adoption, and said, "I was a baby. I was a teen. I was a baby when I had a baby. And I never stopped loving you, not even for 1 minute. And I'm so grateful to your parents, your adoptive parents, your parents for raising you. And I'm so blessed that you have had a beautiful life. And just know that we also love you." And there was a natural connection that Natalie felt for her parents, her birth parents, a natural connection she felt for her siblings, and now they are part of each other's life. 3 children have become 4 children. It's a miracle what can happen when you talk to. So here's what I want to say about the heavy weights that we carry, whether it's a secret or it's shame or it's a rift or it's a mistake or it's a foible. If you want to travel light, if you want to put the heavy weight down, it's actually simple and clear. Talk to, and travel light. Shabbat Shalom.